A note from the Smart family. The statute of limitations in this case has expired on everything except murder. Anyone who comes forward with information will not be charged with any crime.
Yo, what is up? Welcome back to Nate's Sunday Sesh. It's your boy Nate.
It's your boy Deej.
And we're back today. We have a very special guest, our good friend Chris Lambert.
Hello.
How's it going, man?
It's going good.
Awesome. Chris is an audio engineer, a musician, and the host of Your Own Backyard podcast, and he is coming here today to join us for Nate's Sunday Sesh. So thank you so much for being here, bro. It's a very long drive, so we appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to do it.
First thing we kind of just want to talk about is a basic overview for people who don't really know who you are, because I think the biggest thing for the podcast for me is that everybody, not necessarily everybody knows, because everybody still needs to keep finding out about Kristin, but everything is around Kristin. So I just want to take a second and talk about you and talk about the things that you really have accomplished on your own and everything. So to start out for the people, where are you from?
I'm from Orchid, California. It's just south of Santa Maria, and I was born and raised there.
That's cool. That's super cool. Orchid's like kind of Lompoc-ish, or where?
It's kind of north of that. It's about 20 miles north of Lompoc.
Okay.
Is it closer to Thousand Oaks?
No, it's real far from Thousand Oaks.
Okay.
I think it's in between like Lompoc and Santa Maria, right?
Yeah, but it's almost touching Santa Maria. It just becomes Santa Maria. It's just the smaller southern portion of Santa Maria, essentially.
Oh, okay.
It's like a smaller town feel than the downtown part of Santa Maria.
Okay, so born and raised?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's super
Very
cool.
cool.
Where'd you go to high school at?
It's Rigetti High School.
In Santa Maria?
Mm-hmm.
That's super cool.
Yep.
So that's very close to home. It's kind of crazy to just know that people literally in our own backyard are doing things that are top 10 Apple true crime. You know, it's insane. Like there's a lot of hidden talent out in the 805 that you wouldn't really know, as far as like musically, crazy music producers. Like my professor for Cuesta College is like one of the craziest jazz composers for just like random things like that. There's just so much talent here that people don't really know about. So that's super cool.
Yeah, and something that from doing music in this area for so long, it's like you'll notice there's tons of artists in the area, but at a certain point they usually stop doing it because there's not really much outlet here.
Yeah.
Like in the Bay Area or in Los Angeles area, there's a lot of outlet for like venues to perform in and stuff. In this area, there's not a lot anymore.
Yeah.
You know, they've sort of dried up.
Yeah, I totally feel that, especially with me being an artist myself. Like, I think there's one bar in Paso that we can rent out, other than like a couple of the random bars in San Luis. But even then, those are like, they don't even really want you to do a performance. They want you to do like a song and kind of just, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not really a whole like take over our whole thing
Yeah.
for a performance anymore. But how did you really even get into music? Was that just something you grew up with, or?
Pretty young, like 8 or 9, I got like an acoustic guitar and tried to figure out how to play it. But around high school, I got really serious about it. I had a band that played in the 8th grade talent show, and then I got really excited about writing my own songs. And that what took off is the recording aspect of it. My parents got me like one of those old used boombox cassette recorders, and I had it set up in my bedroom, and I would try to write a song and record it, and then bring the tape out and play it for my mom or something and show her what I had written. And then it became like a challenge. Can I, before the next time, because my parents split up when I was young, and so we had some time at my dad's house, some at my mom's, and it became a challenge. Like, can I write 2 or 3 new songs before the next time we go to my mom's house, so I have something to show her? And then it became like a game. It was like every few weeks I would have new material to show my mom and her boyfriend. And
So at 9 years old, you were doing just a bunch of original music?
well, I started probably writing at 12 or 13 is when I got pretty serious. After the 8th grade talent show, I was like, this is something I could see myself doing. And then all through high school, that was like my obsession, was being in my bedroom writing and recording original music, and then playing it for nobody except my parents. Really.
So cool.
That's cool. What instruments did you play? So you said guitar.
Guitar, and then I got like a little toy keyboard. And then once, what happened was when my parents could see that I was genuinely interested, each time that I would show that I could get better at something, they would like buy me a new instrument for Christmas or something. My next Christmas present would be like an upright piano, and then I learned to play that pretty decently. So they got me like an accordion, and they're like, can you do something with this? And so
That's cool.
that became like sort of the tradition, is each time a holiday comes around, we'll get you something new and see if you can figure it out. So pretty soon my bedroom is just like an arsenal of instruments. And so I just learned to play everything myself.
That's honestly super cool. I think that's the best way to expand not only like your musical ability but your genre too. Like, I don't know. I think one of the biggest things for me is that I've listened to too much rap music, like straight up. Like, I need to expand some horizons and be able to get influence from other places, because I feel like that's a huge part of music, is being influenced and to get new ideas from other places. And I feel like you can't if you don't listen to something that's completely different than what you're usually into. So that's super cool that you had that influence from a young age. So was it just a natural drive to pursue music your whole life, or how did that go?
It was probably 8 or 9 years old. I just thought guitars looked cool. It was like, I wanted to try to play one of those. And then I got it. We got like this little toy acoustic guitar, and I would just lay it flat on my lap and just try to pick at it. I had no idea what I was doing. Nobody in my family plays music. I think my grandpa played saxophone before I was even born, but nobody actively played music when I was growing up. It wasn't like a lifelong thing.
That's cool.
It was really the writing and recording aspect that got me excited about it for the first time.
That's cool. So, how soon after did you keep pursuing recording? So, like, the first step was the cassette. Then, what was the next step after that?
After the cassette, then I got like a digital 4-track recorder. It would record on like little, even before SD cards, there were these bigger like flat digital cards that it would read. And then a couple years of recording on that and playing songs for my parents and stuff, they were like, "You're doing pretty good at this. We're gonna what would step it up?" They got me an 8-track recorder that would like burn CDs directly out of the machine, and then eventually moved on to the computer and got myself Pro Tools. And that was, by that time I had graduated high school. I was going to Allen Hancock, which is like a community college in Santa Maria, and I was studying sound production and recording. And so then I learned how to use Pro Tools and Logic and all of those recording programs.
That's super cool. So what's your music process like now? Do you record at home? What do you do?
So I'd been working at a recording studio for the last 5 or 6 years. It's a music shop during the day, and then once they closed at night, it was just kind of a free-for-all. And they had recording equipment and a bunch of instruments. So the last 2 or 3 albums I made, I did there. But for the last, I've put out 11 albums under my own name, and I recorded like 8 of them at home, I think.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Where is the place that you worked at?
It's in Lompoc. It's a music shop during the day, and then a recording studio off hours. And I was the sole recording engineer at a certain point. So people would come in and their band would want to record, and I would be in charge of engineering all that for them and producing the music. A lot of times playing the instruments. I'd have people come in that are like, I have a melody idea, but I don't know how to play any instruments, and we would sit down and try to write a song together, and then they would leave with a finished recording of it. But when somebody didn't have it booked, I would just book myself and write in there.
Is that still around?
It is, yeah. It's called Certain Sparks.
Because I think a lot of people that, especially that watch this podcast, I know a lot of artists. So if you're in Lompoc and you want to go hit the studio, because I think I record people just like freelance in here, but it's not studio quality. You know what I mean? Like, it's never gonna be that, and I tell people that when they come here. But that's really cool. What's the environment like there? I know we're kind of getting a little off track, but it's a booth and it's a whole studio.
Yeah, it's a very old building. It's in Old Town Lompoc, and it's like a historic building from the 1800s. And there's like I think it used to be a department store or something. So there's an upstairs section with a window that faces the whole like bottom floor, and so we just turned that into a vocal booth. So we closed it off, we soundproofed it, we put microphones up there, we put like a little trap drum kit up there.
That's perfect.
And so you can record stuff up there. We would record acoustic guitars up there. There's a grand piano down on the floor. You can set up a drum kit on the floor, and we'd have bands play downstairs. And
that's perfect. Yeah. That's super cool. That's really cool. We need something like that in Paso ASAP. We have one studio in here, but it's not like a full... They have a drum room, I guess, but you could do a full band, but like something where you could have your band in the room and track your instruments together would be super cool for up here. So,
yeah. Question for you: What would you consider your music genre that you output?
It's tough because I've been doing it for so long that I've really gone through so many phases.
Okay.
Like, I started out like just punk rock, like really pure, like I'm not going to play anything ever but punk rock. And pretty quick it was like, it's kind of boring. You can only do so much with it. So I've moved through, I put out like an alternative rock album. I've done like emo music. I've done hip hop. I've done all kinds of different stuff. But the last several albums that I made that were like a real serious attempt to make good music, it started to move into this folk genre where I was using a lot of room noise and like ambient sounds. So I was calling it ambient folk. It's like a
very
lot of
cool.
like kind of spacey ambient sounds surrounding like very basic folk instrumentation.
Super cool. I wasn't aware. Nathan showed me previewed a few songs of yours, and I enjoyed him a lot. So I was just wondering what you considered your genre.
Yeah,
So that was a
thank you.
question I wanted to answer.
Yeah, do you know what you listen to or?
It's I don't remember the name, but it's the one that's the gray with the pink.
Okay, that's the newest one.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, I would call it like ambient folk. I just kind of like the way that sounds.
Super. Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. I would sit back and relax on a car drive and just listen to it.
Yeah.
It's
You did
very cool.
You did a tour, like a coffee shop tour for that, right?
Yeah, I did.
That's super cool. What you did, I saw Phoenix on there. I saw like Lompoc. Where else did you go? That was
We went down the coast, down through Los Angeles. We went to Phoenix. We ended up in Cedar City, Utah. We stayed for a couple days and played there. Went back through Vegas, Southern California. Then we hooked up Northern California. We played Fresno, Santa Cruz, Monterey, and back down the coast.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
What's it like was it a 3-piece band or?
It was just two. It was me and a drummer.
That's super cool. What is
Yeah.
that? What is that like to like just literally just to tour? Like I don't even know what that's like.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Like I just love traveling in general. Like if my girlfriend and I have time off together, we like to just go to like a random town and just stay at a Motel 6. It's like we're just travel people, but doing it with a drummer and having like a goal in each, like we have to be to this place by this time so that we can play a show at 6 p.m. And then after the show, we got to find a place to stay. We got to find somewhere to eat and stuff like that. And then tomorrow morning we have to leave at this time to be to the next town. Getting to know people is the most fun part. Like, especially when we were staying for a couple days in different towns, I made friends in Phoenix and Cedar City and different parts of the country. And so,
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
Where's the farthest you've been?
to play music specifically,
Just in general.
to travel, I've been to Louisiana. My dad lives in Louisiana.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
so I've gone back there maybe 10 times to visit him and family. Went back there a couple years ago, and then been to like Wisconsin, Chicago. That's like kind of just a little halfway past the midway point.
That's super cool. My girlfriend's from Louisiana.
Oh, cool. What part do you know?
She's gonna kill me.
Sorry.
No, she's gonna kill me. She was born in oh, dude. I
Don't
want to
look
say
at me.
she was born in New Orleans, but she lived in a different town that was outside, and she just went there, and she sent me a bunch of pictures, and she's gonna murder me. So it's
Oh,
fine.
good. Cool.
I forget what I was gonna say now. Do you have like so we talked about music a little bit. Do you have a background in like journalism or interviewing, or other than the Are We Okay podcast? Like, how did you get into wanting to do that?
I've always loved writing. Like I've been a writer since I was like a little kid. That was my first passion, was writing short stories and stuff. My girlfriend started a magazine in 2016 called Coyote and Oak, and it was distributed like in the San Luis Obispo area. It's like a boutique magazine, and she did it all herself and got it printed. And she would hire writers and photographers to collaborate on pieces about different local artists and creative type people. And so she started asking if I would write stories for that. So that was sort of how I exercised that. I think I did maybe 6 or 7 interviews on subjects, but I tried to do, she was really pushing for like experimental writing, like that gonzo journalism style where you're reading a Rolling Stone piece, but it's not just about the artist. It's like, I'm sitting in a coffee shop waiting for them to show up. It's raining outside. Somebody's yelling at the waiter. And like, you really set the tone and set the scene so the reader feels like they're with you. I tried to establish that. So that's probably where I developed interview skills and all that, and also just painting a picture so that the person who's listening feels like they're actually in a place.
That definitely shows in your own backyard 1,000%. Like that whole experience is just so immersive. So what is, I know we talked about it a little bit before we started, but what is Are We Okay for people who don't know?
I started Are We Okay in early 2016. It was a podcast a lot like this one. It was conversational, and every week I would invite a new artist or creative type person over, and then eventually that started whittling down to just interesting people or fun people to be around, people who had interesting life stories, because I started realizing I would invite an artist over, and sometimes they're really hard to get them to talk, like to get stuff out of them. So if I just thought somebody could have a good conversation, I would invite them over. And my goal was just every single Tuesday, I'm going to put out a new episode no matter what. And the first time that I like miss one, I'll rethink this and decide whether I want to stop or keep going. And I never missed a single Tuesday. I did 156 episodes with 156 guests over the course of 3 years, and I finally stopped last summer so that I could do Your Own Backyard. So I stopped when I needed to.
So you didn't miss a single Tuesday.
Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
We were trying to go for that, and we had this life stuff happen to us last year, but we went like 11 episodes every single Sunday, and then we had to stop, and then
some things
now
happen.
we back.
We're back living together, so it's easier to do this type of stuff. But
especially now that, because Are We Okay got like a decent local following, and people would ask me if they could talk about how do I set up my podcast? Do you have advice for how I can do this? And my number one advice was always pick a schedule and stick to it no matter what. And what that meant for me was get a bunch of episodes in the can and don't even tell anybody you're starting a podcast. And then tell people you're starting and put out the first episode, and you've got 5 or 6 left over to buy you more time to get more episodes in. And as long as you stay ahead of it, it always seems to work out that way.
So when I listened to the Are We Okay podcast, your final one, you actually commented on your 805 Living podcast with is her name Jamie?
Yeah, so I collaborated with a writer named Jamie Lewis. She's the one that also reads the end credits of Your Own Backyard.
Oh, okay. The reason why I brought that up, you said that she does 10 podcast increments, and she releases them all at once.
Right.
That's very interesting.
She does seasons
technique.
at a time, and so she records 10 episodes, and then I'm editing those and stuff, and then she doesn't put them out until all 10 are done, and then she takes a break while those are out and then moves on to the next season.
The next 10.
It's a smart way to do it.
That's very cool. It's an interesting technique that I never even thought about, so it was cool to hear about that.
Yeah.
What's it like to edit somebody else's podcast?
It's kind of second nature. Like I feel like, especially a conversational podcast, it's just there's such a rhythm to how I compress things and how I mix things and limit and all the different things that I do that I can kind of just do it muscle memory sort of. And then the most difficult part, just making sure that everything comes out, even and stuff. There's always, no matter how much time I spend mixing stuff, there's always somebody who's going to comment and be like, oh, it's too loud in the car, or like, you can't really hear what's going on. And it's like, there's really only so much you can do with that before you're just blowing out, through compression. And now everything's nice and even, but it sounds like robots talking. It doesn't even sound natural anymore. And I really try to push natural sound. That was a big thing for me in producing music too, is instead of have you heard of the loudness wars through audio engineering? Like a lot of producers over the past 20 years or so have pushed the boundaries of compression so that when you look at music now, it's just like a block sound form and you can't even see like the natural fluctuations. And I always try to back off on that. I like a lot more natural tones when I record.
That's really cool. I'm going to have to pick your brain after on the
Sure.
audio engineering aspect of things, because some people don't really care when it gets down to like compressors and different plugins to use, and just a bunch of questions I have for you. So.
And the way that we consume music now, like when we listen on our phones and stuff, most people won't notice a difference anyway, so they just don't care. But it's a big thing for me. It's just like I'm just passionate about trying to get pure sound.
Well, he knows for anything that I do, like especially around this podcast and everything, I wanted everything to be super professional, just because anything that I want to put out, I just want it to look good, like just straight up. And so he knows that I'm like really anal about certain things.
Definitely. I mean, we switched the camera up. I mean, he bought this guy not so long ago. He really tries to put that professional aspect into this. So he definitely understands where you're coming from with that.
Yeah. And you learn as you go too. I did a podcast for years that was just a handheld recorder set on a table between us, and it was fine. But then the next time I started a podcast, it was like, what do I need to step this up? Better microphones, a better recorder, those sorts of things. So I've learned something new each time.
Yeah. What kind of equipment do you use to record? Like, let's say if you were going out to do an episode of Your Own Backyard, what do you bring?
So I have it's a Marantz brand field recorder. It's like the size of a VHS tape. That
sort
I
of
wear
like
on a
the
strap.
H6?
It's maybe twice the size of that, and it hangs on a strap on my side.
Oh, okay.
And then I've got a shotgun microphone so that if I'm pointing at a subject, it's like cutting out all background noise except exactly what I'm pointing at. That's what I use for like my field recordings. You hear like me crunching through leaves and stuff, or when I'm interviewing people in the field.
So you just point the mic like directionally for sound effects and stuff, like if you're doing ambient noise?
Yeah.
That's pretty
and
cool.
I've got like a big like massive windsock to go on it so that wind doesn't mess it up and stuff. And bird noises and all those things that I used for texture.
Well, I heard in one of the podcasts I listened to before this, when we were getting ready to interview you, that you would like record excessive amounts. Like you would start recording as soon as you get out of the car in some places, just because you get all the ambient noise and all the sound effects.
Yeah, for most of the interviews that I did where the person was in another town, I would record the entire drive there and back. Just me talking out loud, being like, here's what I want to talk to them about. And I used some of that like here and there, but at a certain point it gets exhausting every time you're going to interview someone to have to listen to a 2 or 3 minute clip of you driving there. So I tried to just use, the car door opening, closing, the keys starting.
Which is absolutely fire, if I do say so myself. Like that's just like the whole thing.
It really puts you in there. In my opinion, being not having the background you guys both have, it really sets the tone, and I feel like I'm sitting in the car with you when I'm listening to the podcast. It's very cool. Yeah. It's very unique.
It also scares the absolute shit out of me sometimes too, especially like when you're sitting there. There's a part in the podcast when you talk about being in front of Paul's house at 6 a.m. and you're kind of just talking to yourself, and you can just feel the tenseness in your voice. And I don't know, there's something about that whole thing just made my spine shiver.
Yeah,
shiver.
Good.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the goal.
I was gonna ask you why you stopped Are We Okay, but that's because you did your own backyard. In your opinion, what's the best thing about podcasting?
I think as in terms of a medium, it's something that people can consume while they're doing other things. It doesn't take as much energy as watching a TV show or something or a documentary. It's like something you can do while you're exercising. You can do it while you're working at your desk. You can do it. Like my mom listens to my podcast while she's working she works at the library. And so she's like checking in books and stuff. And then if somebody asks her a question, she just pauses and pops it out. It's something that you can consume while you're doing that. And what I learned in doing your own backyard is that people get super addicted to it that way, in a way even more so than I think they do with like a docu-series or something, which is just as exciting. But with a podcast, it's like, this is part of my daily routine. Like, I'm going to listen to this on my drive to work, or while I'm at the gym, or while I'm working, or I'm going to sit down. Some people started organizing listening parties where they would sit down and listen to my podcast together as a group after dinner or something. Mm-hmm. It feels new. It feels like a fresh way to consume media that didn't exist a little more than 10 years ago,
Yeah, that's crazy. And I think for most people, like, podcasts are like a form of escape too, like especially if you're at work, because I listen to podcasts all day every day at work. Like,
definitely when I started listening to your podcast originally, it was driving from Las Vegas and made the drive seem like 2 hours, because you're just you're in your mind working and stuff. So yeah, it's a cool, podcasting is a different aspect of listening to something. I just like it.
Yeah,
I can't reiterate that enough.
Yeah,
it's
I go
cool.
through phases where when I'm driving, I won't listen to music at all. I just listen to podcasts. And then sometimes I start to burn out and I go back to music for a while. But it's like a completely different, it really does take your mind off of whatever else is going on.
That's funny because I do that same exact thing, and I kind of force myself to listen to music sometimes because of the same thing I was talking about before about inspiration and stuff, because sometimes I feel like I'm just sitting there listening to people talk for like hours and hours on end, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But which isn't like bad, but I'm like, at the end of the day, I need to switch it up or else I'll be one-sided.
Yeah.
What would you tell someone who is like just trying to start out their own podcast? Like, what other than keep a consistent schedule? Like, what are like a few things that you could say to somebody?
My number one is always make sure that you're gonna put it out regularly, or you know how you're gonna release it, and don't compromise that. Get good equipment. Like, make sure that you have the right thing for what you're doing. It's also not necessary though. Like, as long as you could record it on your phone, as long as you know how to clean it up afterwards and edit it together and all that stuff. Learn how to do that for yourself. I think a lot of people now who are starting podcasts, they like the idea of it, but they have no idea how much work is going to have to go in afterwards. So sometimes like people are asking me to edit their podcast, which I'm happy to do, but it's like, you should also learn how to do this. You should learn this skill too, because it should be something you can do autonomously. That's another thing I like about the podcast medium. It's something that I was able to do in my like dining room of my apartment all by myself, like all the music, everything. I did every part of it. And that's something I couldn't do with a documentary. I would have to hire a crew to help me put together, like somebody to film and somebody to cut and edit and all that stuff. I think podcasts are something you can do all on your own. And if you're not going to take advantage of it, why bother?
Yeah, that's honestly super cool. Like, so I can't even like. So what goes into your whole process of doing a score for the podcast? Like do you listen to the episode? Do you put the audio in first and then you start to play something? Like how does that work?
Yeah, I had been working at this recording studio, which I also quit that at the same time that I quit the Are We Okay podcast. It was like, your own backyard is the only thing I'm going to do right now so that I can do this right. The whole time I was working there for the last 6 months I was there, when I would get some downtime, I would just pick up a guitar and try to come up with a little theme of some kind. And so I had just in my phone, I had like Kristin's theme, like Denise's theme, which is Kristin's mom. Like I was trying to come up with tones and melodies that matched the emotion that I was going for. And it was really difficult. That's maybe what took me the longest is the emotion for this story is somewhere between like, it's not horror, you know, like a lot of true crime podcasts, the score is like this dollhouse chiming horror music, which is fine, but it totally does not work with this story because there's not like this sinister, dark, scary part. It's more like a longing and a sadness and like an emptiness. And I was really trying to nail that. And it took me a long time to get it right. I tried a bunch of different themes that were just not right. And so probably a year was just working on ideas. But then once the episodes were put together and recorded, then I would sit down and like, now I'm going to produce this as its own. I've had Kristin's theme sitting around forever. Now I'm actually going to play it on the piano. Then I'm going to add bass and then I'm going to add strings and I'm going to do it like a full production, you know.
Is it all VST? Like when you add the strings and
it's a mix. It's a mix of both, especially the theme song. That's real cellos and violins.
I was gonna say those sound super fire. Yeah. So if that's VST plugins, I was I don't know.
And so I'm playing acoustic guitar. I don't even remember what else is in that song, but then I hired a cellist and a violinist to do their own parts on it. And they both did a bunch of different takes and then I kind of mixed together the best parts. Yeah. And because that tone was something I just thought when you launch into this podcast, I want it to be every week when you start it, like, here we go, like we're going on an adventure, whatever is going to happen this week. Kind of with the cold opens that I did, I wanted to drop like a little cliffhanger at the end. And then when the music punches in, I wanted it to be like an exciting moment.
Yeah, it's honestly like that theme song was like just perfect for it. And it does... It's way better for the story too, as you were saying, because like I feel like if you did go something that was dark or sinister, it wouldn't fit nearly as well because the whole story is for longing, like exactly how you were saying.
Yeah.
It's just crazy to me. So what part of the theme song was VST then? So
I don't think there's any in that song. I think it's just acoustic guitar, drum, and strings.
Okay, that's super cool because I was really blown away by the theme song. So I was trying to ask because I didn't know if that was something you did by yourself or for the background noise and for certain like ambient like the synthesizers that you use, is that all like analog gear you have, or
that's so there's Teenage Engineering makes a little tiny synth called the OP1.
Yeah,
that's the majority of the ambient score is all done on that. It's you can take samples of like your voice and then play it back and slow it down and do all kinds of crazy things with it. And I would input that into Pro Tools and then layer acoustic guitars and stuff over the top of it. But it all started with OP1.
That's insane. That piece of gear, I've seen people talk about that, and that little tiny piece of gear it's how many keys is it? Isn't it 32 or something crazy?
I think it's less than that. I think it's like 24 maybe. And so that really limited me because I was also using that as my MIDI controller. So if I was going to play strings or piano, I had to do it through that. And then I'd have to like octave up and octave down to reach the entire... I finally did buy myself last month a full-size MIDI keyboard so I can do more work at home now. But everything started out on the OP1.
That's crazy. That is super insane to me. Like, I don't even think you can understand what that thing looks like though, DJ, but I
have no clue.
How do I even explain this? It's literally this big though. No exaggeration.
It's a tiny little keyboard with
and it has 24 keys on, and that's insane. Isn't that's like famously like a Childish Gambino song was made with that? Like This Is America or something. I remember that being like the selling point for a while. That's the only reason why I remember. Something like that.
Yeah, I wish you could see through Bon Iver. He put out like an entire album where a lot of the samples were made with that thing, and it's just his voice looping through that. And I was like, what is making that sound because I need that.
Do you use that in a lot in your own music?
Yeah, I do. The last album that I made has a ton of that going through it, and a lot of it is my voice, or like I went to the Grand Canyon and I recorded myself clapping, and then I ended up using that for percussion in a lot of songs, and
that's fire.
Just all kinds of stuff. Yeah, because it lets you take samples and then loop them on a screen. It's got like this crazy little screen it's got like a cartoon cow that you can like mess with, and it changes the effect settings, and there's like a race car setting where you mess with the sound and the cars crazy. On this track. It's a weird little toy, but it's super expensive too. I think it was like $1,000 for this tiny little thing, but it's so worth it. I've used it so much.
So it has its own like analog sounds that are what's the word, like proprietary to it. Like it comes with its own.
Yeah, it comes with a bunch of presets.
That's cool. That's cool. So you get like a whole synthesizer, actual, like, instead of just a MIDI controller. I didn't know it had its own set sounds.
Yeah, and then it's got a tape setting, so it shows you these tape reels, and you can actually record what you're doing, rewind the tape, fast forward it, play it back, cut off pieces, chop it up, and mix. You can do a ton with it just on the go. So I brought it, like the last few vacations I've gone on, I'll just take that with me instead of an acoustic guitar now, because you can do so much with it. So then I come home with ideas that I can input into Pro Tools and play with.
Yeah, that's super cool. How long did it take you to do all the score for the podcast? Like, is that something you do after you get everything?
Yeah,
or?
I did it weekly, especially like in the first episode, a lot of the music that was played I had written a long time ago, and I just had to fit it and actually record it once the episode was ready. But then by week 2, it's like, now I don't want to reuse the same music every single week. There's certain themes that I wanted to repeat, but there's different moods, and when different characters come in, like in episode 4, I introduced or 3 maybe, I introduced Dennis Mann, who is the guy who moved from North Carolina to try to help with Kristin's case, and there was like a little bit of a silly. He's a little bit of a comic relief for a moment, because his tactics and the way that he went about it were very unorthodox, and I really wanted that show, because when I think of what he did, there's a little bit of a humorous, playful element to it. So I didn't have music that matched that, so I had to write something that week. So then pretty soon it was every time I would put out an episode, now I need to sit down and score it, to the point where when I put out the final episode, I was scoring it the morning it was supposed to come out, and people were messaging me like crazy, like, where is the episode? And it's not put together yet. I'm still actually putting the music to it, you know? So I should have planned far ahead, but I didn't. That's just how I did it.
That's cool. Now, I just want to tell this for people who haven't seen the podcast, go listen to it, because I'm going to start talking about things that are going to ruin your experience for it. If you want to watch the podcast and you haven't yet, please go listen to that and come back. But so the first thing I want to really ask you is why, just straight up, why was this case so important to you? Because I feel like I mean, it's in your own backyard, but what got you like really the ball rolling in the whole thing?
Yeah, I kind of explain it in the first episode, but basically I grew up in this area, and so when I was 8 years old and she went missing, it was all over the news. It was a big deal, and then it just stopped being in the news at a certain point. And so as I got older and the internet started actually coming around, like when I was growing up, the internet was very slow and you couldn't find a lot of stuff. So by the time I was like, I'd graduated high school, the internet was full-fledged at that point. So I started Googling things like that, like whatever happened to Kristin Smart? Did they find her? Because I know her body was missing, I think. I know she had been killed, or maybe they don't even know that she was killed. And so I was trying to look into it. So every few years I would check back in, what's the update on the Kristin Smart case? And there weren't updates. Up until a few years ago, they dug up part of the Cal Poly hillside, and it became a national news story again that they think they found her. They're going to dig this part up, and maybe she's here. A lot of news stories got it wrong, and they were like, they found her remains, and people got excited, and they didn't find her remains. They found, I think, maybe some animal bones or something, but it's still going on. And so they hadn't released an update, and it was summer of 2018. I was like, why has nothing been said about this in 2 years? It's really weird that they did that big dig and they've been silent about it. They didn't say we didn't find her, but they didn't say we did. And so I looked into it, and I found that there had been this LA Times article that had come out 10 years before that went super in depth into who was involved, who walked her home that night, like what street were they on when it happened, who was involved in, getting rid of her body maybe, and what had gone wrong. And so once I read that piece, by the end of it, I was like, this would make a great documentary. And I can't believe nobody's done this story yet, because for a while her name was nationally known.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, it just sort of disappeared. And even locally, it was like, do people know about this? So I started asking people I know, like, do you remember the Kristin Smart case? And they got it confused with other cases. They thought she had been found a long time ago alive, and they thought she had been kidnapped and escaped. And everybody I asked had a different idea of what had gone on. My mom was like, wasn't there something to do with a mattress? Like, what are you talking about? Like, everybody had a different piece, and some of them were right and some of them were wrong. But I started to realize, I don't think anybody's going to do a documentary on this. And I don't know if they're going to talk about it anymore. Her parents are getting older. I think they must be devastated that people aren't even questioning this. They're not... Maybe they don't want to talk about this, or maybe they're done talking about it. And so I took my time, and I finally decided to reach out to them, and they were a little hesitant, but then they kind of saw what I was doing. They got it. My personality is maybe part of the reason why they trusted me, because I'm a very shy, quiet person. Mm-hmm. I'm not like this producer who's coming in like, we can make money off of this. Like, I got a great idea for how to sell this. It was just like, I really, really want to know what happened to Kristin. Like, I really want to know. And I don't know that I can help, but I can try. Like, can I just try to tell this story? Mm-hmm. And so they were very helpful. And that's what got me into it, was just reading that LA Times piece and going, why isn't there more about this now?
Yeah, I'm sure it blended too with Rex when that whole thing was happening in San Luis too.
Yeah, when Rex Krebs, they thought that she might be one of the bodies they would dig up, and she wasn't. So then it just disappeared again.
Yep. Yeah, I do remember you mentioning that in your podcast.
Yeah.
Even my own boss, when I was telling him about the podcast before, like, I even thought about DMing you for the interview, before any of that, he was like, "Oh, didn't they find her?" And I think he was talking about, because they found Kristin Modafferi, right?
They didn't. No.
They haven't found her.
They haven't found Kristin Modafferi.
What? Was it Elizabeth Smart that they found?
Yeah,
then?
Elizabeth Smart was the one that was kidnapped from her bedroom window, and they found her a year later.
Yeah, I think that's what he was saying that he thought was her body. Because I remember that there was a very common misconception that he thought for a long time that he had been found. I forget, or she, excuse me.
Yeah.
That and it was one of those two, either the Kristin Modafferi or the Elizabeth Smart case.
Yeah. And even the people who got it right, like who knew it was Kristin Smart, they thought when they did that dig and then they announced, "Oh, we found some remains," people were like, "Good, they got her." And then it was over and they stopped thinking about it. So some people, when they listened to my podcast, they were like, "Wait, this girl's still missing? I thought that they found her years ago." And so I tried to walk through that in a certain episode where it's like, yes, they did dig up at the P, but we have no idea what they found. But if it was Kristin's body, we would know it by now.
Yeah. That's absolutely insane, and especially with all the certain little things that we'll talk about later. It's gone on with just like the loss of evidence, and just literally just the secrecy that the sheriff's department has to take because they're conducting an investigation makes people ask a ton of questions that I feel like are not warranted, considering that they don't have a right to know, but I understand why they want to know.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
23 years is a long time.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, how long does it take? I don't know. And when you don't know what's happening behind the scenes, it's like you get impatient. It's like, this shouldn't be taking this long.
Yeah, 100%. So for each episode of the podcast, did you have a bunch done before you went weekly, or how did that work? You were doing them weekly, or like?
So I was writing scripts for like a year. So the first thing that I did when, like I said, I read the LA Times article. I was like, why isn't somebody done a documentary? And then I just got the briefest, what if you did it? And then was like, that's crazy. But then it kept coming back over and over again. I kept coming up with that idea again, like, maybe I could do this. If I did a podcast, I've got all the equipment. I know what I'm doing. I know how to get it online. I know how to do this. But could I actually do it? And so I just kept toying with the idea. And the first thing I did was, are there episodes here? Like, is this a story that can be split into segments? And so I split it into 5 different stories, and it was the story of Kristin and who she was. It was the story of the main suspect and who he is, how they intersected and met, the story of the suspect's parents' backyard, which is a big theory about where she might have been buried at one point, and then people like Dennis Mann, who I mentioned, came out here from North Carolina to get involved, and then he really kicked up a lot of dust because for a long time it had gotten quiet around here. And after, I said I have all these articles in here in chronological order, the stories stop coming at a certain point. And then when Dennis shows up, it's like, boom, there's a whole bunch of new, this guy's looking for Kristin Smart and he's crazy. And then the suspect's mom assaulted him, and that was a headline. And so he really got her talked about again. And he started the Facebook group. And then there's a guy named David Smallwood who started his own newspaper, and every time he would put out a new issue, it was mainly focused on the Kristin Smart case. And he went very in-depth too. He started interviewing people, but he also got very like accusatory about like the police are covering this up, and it soured a lot of people to him, especially the SLO Sheriff's Department at a certain point didn't really take him seriously, because it's like he thinks we're part of a big conspiracy with Cal Poly to cover this up and hide evidence, and I think he even upset Kristin's parents at a certain point. It was like, we don't want you putting this paper out and saying this stuff that's really interfering with the investigation. But each of those things, those were major events that it's like, this is still an episode. Even if you don't like respect this guy, what he did is definitely a big part of Kristin's story. And so I split it up into 5 episodes. It ended up actually spilling over into 6 episodes. And then I thought that's the arc of the story I would tell. I had that done like November of 2018, like those pieces, and then I just started scripting out like episode 1, this story needs to be written, this piece needs to get done, and I started laying out. I've got this big corkboard on my wall with colored index cards, and I started splitting it into scenes. Like the scene where she gets walked home from the party, that needs to bridge over into the scene where, you know, her and Paul split off and they go back to their separate dorm rooms, or do they? That's kind of a cliffhanger ending there, and breaking it up into scenes that way. And that's how I started filling in each script.
That's cool. So you kind of took like a step back look at the whole thing before you even started recording anything, or was...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, I didn't record a single thing until, maybe August, even like July or August of last year.
Really? So everything has been like within like not even a year.
Yeah. And especially once I started putting the episodes out, then it was really like, oh my gosh, episode 3 needs to come out next week, and I only have like half of it written. But I have all these cards laid out, so I know what's there. I know the scenes and how I get from this episode to episode 4, but I haven't sat down and typed it up yet. And because a lot of it is narration and my voiceover, it's like it's got to be written. I have to write something out. And so at a certain point, I started really having to crack down and get it done, because now the clock is running and people were getting like angry. Like when it's like, where is the new episode? It was supposed to be out at midnight, even though I never promised that. It's just, I figured out people expect new episodes to come out exactly at midnight. So
yeah, it's such a gnarly expectation. I know what it goes into our little podcast for post. I couldn't imagine the type of the way the tracks look for you with all the score and everything. Like that would probably just give me a headache.
Yeah,
I could do it definitely, but it's definitely a lot of work. So
yeah. The last episode I put out, episode 6, I didn't sleep the entire night. Like, I was up for like 48 hours making sure that everything got done, and still there were people like, where's the I think people gave me bad reviews on iTunes because they were like, I used to love this podcast, but now it's not coming out anymore. And it's like 3 hours late. Like, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Just all mad about it.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's so funny. What are some of your best resources that helped you really understand the case? I know that I asked you to bring in that just for the pure optical of it.
Right.
Is that majority of your research, or like...
You know, this was a big portion of it, only because chronologically, to get a sense of how the investigation played out. I didn't know like what was going on in 2001, what was going on in 2002, and I want to make sure that I get everything that happened. And so what I did was I would go to the library. I subscribed to a bunch of newspaper archive websites and stuff, and I cut out every single article that mentions Kristin. But then once I would find out people who were involved, or people who were maybe at the party that night with her, then I would search their name and find like times that they had been in the Mustang Daily because they were interviewed for something during WoW Week. I would print that out. And so it's anybody who is peripherally connected to this case in any way, if they were in a newspaper, they're in here too. And then I sorted them by colored tabs from 1996 to 2019. And so this is everything that's ever been printed about Kristin that was archived.
Are you continually adding?
Yeah, but the weird thing now is that every new article that's come out is about the podcast.
About you,
so
I was going to say.
And so like you can sort of see like just visually, 1996 is this massive tab. 97's pretty big. 98's smaller. 99's a little smaller. As it goes on, each tab is tinier and tinier because there's less news about her. And then 2019 is just this explosion of the podcast is starting. The podcast is coming out now. This guy started a podcast. Like, there's all these news stories about her. And I made sure too, each time I was interviewed for a piece, it's like, I'm going to send you pictures, and they're pictures of Kristin. Like, I don't want to be on the front page. All the news people, when KSBY contacted me and asked to do an interview, it's like, do I have to be on camera? Because I really don't want to be the story. I want Kristin to be the story. And if the podcast is the angle, that's fine. But I don't want to be like the authority figure in this. I'm just the person who started telling her story again. So I've tried to make sure that Kristin is on the front page every time it is printed again. So yeah, I've got a number of articles that just came out in the last 6 months since the podcast.
That's insane.
That's super cool. Well, I'm thinking about it too. Congratulations on getting a new sign redone. That was gifted, right?
That was incredible. Yeah. So there's a local sign shop called Brand Creative West that just offered to do that for free.
Oh, that's super cool.
The sign, like I mentioned in the first episode, the billboard is really what kept her in my mind, and a lot of people too. Because we would have forgotten about her if we hadn't driven past this sign in Arroyo Grande every once in a while that's like missing Cal Poly student. But it started to fade. It was out in the sun for a long time. It was printed on like this tarp material. It had one of her senior photos. And at a certain point, her face was like so washed out, you couldn't see it from far away. And then the ordinances in the town changed or whatever, where they had to move the sign back because it was not regulation for some reason anymore. So it's like up against the building now. There's trees in front of it.
I've seen it.
Yeah. And so at a certain point, it was like, I've missed it. Like the first time I went up there looking for it again intentionally, I've driven past it a bunch, but when I went up there a couple years ago looking for it intentionally to get a look at it, I couldn't find it. And I drove past it a few times before I was like, oh, it's right here. Like, it's right here. It's just so set back and it's so faded out, you can't really read it. And so when they offered to do that, it was like, what an amazing, like, full circle that sign is what made me remember her. And then because I retold her story, they're going to do a better sign now. And so they offered to put my website on it, which was incredible. So now when people see the billboard, they can go to yourownbackyardpodcast.com and listen to the story too.
Beautiful website, by the way.
Thank you.
It is very well, like, it's very well made to be able to listen to it and see everything. Like, like if you like scroll down, because I didn't even realize that it was set up that way until I saw him listening to it on his computer.
Yeah.
Because I've always done it on my phone at work, and then when I saw that, I was like, damn, I need to listen to it like this so I can see everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It really puts you there, and you get a perspective of who the person is you're talking to or interviewing, and you get a picture of Paul in high school, and the breakdown is cool with the pictures. It's very exciting to listen and still be able to see and kind of still put that gear in motion.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a very visual person, and so when I listen to other people's podcasts, I get obsessive about like when I listen to Serial. I don't know if you listened to the first season of Serial, when that was the big true crime breakthrough podcast where everybody was obsessed with listening to it and started talking about it, and I think it really pushed podcasts into a new realm. But there was a point where like they find a car parked in a parking lot, and it was like, I want to know exactly what that parking lot looks like. I want to know exactly like where the intersection was. I'm on Google Earth trying to find the spot. And so I was like, I want to do that for people who are listening to mine. If they want to know what the billboard looks like, they want to know what the spot where she disappeared from looks like, I'm going to have pictures of all that.
Yeah, that's insane. And especially going to there, I was there literally on Sunday because I wanted to actually go to the places, each house. I went to Ruben's house. I went to Susan's house. And honestly, dude, like I drove by Ruben's house, and someone was loading up a early 2000s gray BMW, and from the back was wearing like a wife beater, and he was built like Paul. And it was one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. His hair was a little too dark, and I don't want to make any assumptions, but just stuff like that was like, it was way too surreal for me. Like when I drove by.
Yeah, and to know like where Susan's house is, it's literally on that main street. Like I didn't realize the proximity of the sign to her house.
Not even, I think everything, both houses and the sign are within a mile of each other.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not even a joke, which is absolutely insane. And you said that they still converse and they still hang out to this day, right?
They do. Yeah, I've seen them together many times. And a lot of times when like Dennis Mann he made sort of a practice of parking outside of Susan's house and just sitting there. He would write his website in his car outside of her house, and she would call the police. But every time Dennis showed up, Ruben would fly around the corner and pull up at her house. They're in constant contact with each other, but they're really, the thing that connects them and bonds them is this case now. It's our son is the suspect in this, and people are harassing us, and so they've hung on. And like I mentioned in one of the episodes, how bizarre that they would decide to stay in those houses when they've been on the front cover of like the Santa Maria Times and the Slow Tribune. People know what the houses look like. The word gets around. Like, I did not mention their addresses at all in my podcast because I didn't want any trouble. It's like, I'm not going to be to blame if people are harassing them. So I did not mention it, but it's like, it's so easy to Google. Well, if you Google it, you find it immediately.
Well, when you stand outside staring down the Google car, it's very easy to find your house.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, very, very easy. And that's all I can say. Like,
and somebody at some point, it was a couple years ago now, I have no idea who did it or when, but somebody actually marked on Google Earth Kristin Smart's alleged grave, like right over the top of Susan's house. So if you're just zooming in around there, it pops up with that info.
Oh, that's gnarly.
And so it was like, I hope, like, part of it was like, I don't want people to bother them because it's just going to cause trouble, and they're going to call the cops.
Right.
And the more that people bother them, the more ammo they have against, it's like they tried to sue the Smart family saying people are bothering us because this Dennis guy started a website. He puts up pictures of us and now people are harassing us. So they try to sue the Smart family, who are like grieving their daughter's disappearance still and not at all responsible. So I didn't want to add to that. It's like, please don't bother them. Please don't go to their houses. But, go get a look at them, like drive by. Like, that's what I do pretty regularly, just because it's on, a main thoroughfare. It's right off of the main strip of the village. And if you're going through, you might as well hang your head out the window and get a look.
Most of the time you can't not drive by it too. If you're going to Lopez or you're doing something off the 101, I think you can take a different route if you want to, but that's one of the main highways through the village and through just AG in general. So
yeah, there's not a great spot to drive through the village and turn around until you start getting past that street anyways.
Exactly.
Too.
You got to pass it. So yeah.
That's absolutely insane to me. They're definitely protecting something. Like, you don't live in that house for 20 some extra years,
23, 24 years,
when you're getting harassed and putting up no trespassing signs because you see people coming all the time. You don't, like, I don't think anybody ever gets comfortable with that unless you don't want to leave for some particular reason.
You can't even walk into a Walmart and probably not get seen. I don't get why you haven't picked up and left and went something. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, there's lots of pictures that people will post to the Facebook group of them shopping at Trader Joe's or Walmart or something. It's like, I saw them today. And people are like, it's like seeing a ghost. It's like, this is the person who probably knows where Kristin is, and we just can't do anything about it. But they stay around here. And like I mentioned in the podcast, all of their family lives down south. Their daughter lives up north, and Paul lives down south. Mm-hmm. So it's like, why did you guys stick around here? Nobody likes you. Your lives are absolutely miserable, and everybody knows how to find you. Just leave. Just go be anonymous. And it's like, you could even move somewhere nice like Cambria. It's not that far, and you could have a better life. But they don't. They stay here, and it's like, what is the strategy unless something is going on at both of those houses, and they can't leave because they know if they do leave, something will be discovered. Yeah,
it's insane. They've been divorced for many years, correct? And divorced and remarried, both of them, or just Susan?
She's not remarried, actually.
Oh, so they're just...
She's been living with her boyfriend for like 20 years now, but they've never gotten married.
Mike McConville, right?
Right, yeah.
Dude, that's gnarly. That's a whole nother layer of that I didn't even realize. Like,
yeah.
I feel bad for that gentleman being brought in,
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and he really became one of them, though. Like, surprisingly, you would think that he would maybe be the sympathetic one because he wasn't there initially for all of the trouble.
And it's not his kid.
But he's not. He's kind of crazy, too. If you go by, he'll scream at you. And
well, I remember when you were mentioning Dennis, when he walked up to the door, he asked for his ID, scanned it, and told him, I want you to leave. You can go now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is crazy.
And it's not even his kid, too, so you think he doesn't even have a foot in the game. Like, you would think that he'd be the tell-all person if he's with some crazy family that he got sucked into, you know what I mean? Like, if it was me, I'd leave and I'd tell everybody, but obviously the fact that he's been there for 20-some years, he's got to have some foot in it. You know what I mean? Or something like...
There's a niche that he he's hanging on
Yeah,
to.
and according to them, I don't know, because they could be lying. Maybe they were having an affair the whole time that she was married to Ruben. I don't know. But according to them in their deposition, they didn't start officially dating till like 98 or 99. And it's like, okay, that's the perfect opportunity for her to move out of that house and move into his house. Or like, you guys go move somewhere else. But the fact that he moved into that house when it was already such a hot spot that people were suspicious of, it's like, why are you guys putting yourself in that position? Why would you ever want to be there? And you mentioned the no trespassing signs that are on her house now. Those actually were not put up until a couple months ago when we did the candlelight vigil. Mm-hmm. So we did a candlelight vigil that some people organized. I was not a part of organizing that. They did it on their own and invited me to it, and really cool like show of community support and stuff. But the Flores family found out we were doing it before it even happened, and some people were like, yeah, we just saw her in the front yard putting up like chains and no trespassing signs, and she put up a big flag on her porch that has like the coiled up snake that says don't tread on me. Mm-hmm. And so like just as a message to all of us, like don't violate our rights and don't step on our property. And that's sort of what their attitude has been all along, is leave us alone, you guys are bothering us.
Yeah.
What do you think? Why do you think she rented her house out to begin with? I forget her name.
Yeah, she did just kind of try it for a while.
She rented. It wasn't renting. What I remember from the podcast, they were driving through, the younger couple, and then they got a better deal on the rental, from what I understand.
Yeah.
And then when they started allowing the police to come investigate because they were legally allowed to because they were residents. I just don't get what all of a sudden clicked for her. Like, okay, I can't let anybody be here anymore.
Yeah, I think, I don't know really, but my suspicion is that they thought that by renting it out, it would like sort of, cover their trail a little bit, because maybe something was there. Like, I feel like something was there. The story about the watch, and the story about the earring and all of that. I feel like whether Kristin was there temporarily or whether her belongings were brought there or destroyed or buried there, I think the most likely scenario is that something was there, and so they thought, we need to get away from here, we'll rent it out, and they'll never suspect that something's in that spot. But then pretty soon you have the tenant that's renting it out as the Lassiter family. Here's this watch beeping every morning at like 4:20 a.m. every single morning in their backyard, and they can't find it. It's buried for some reason. They find this earring in their driveway that looks like it has maybe blood or something on it. And so they start to get suspicious that maybe something is going on at this house. And at the time that they said, okay, you guys can bring in cadaver dogs, come look, like, we're renting the house, you have a right to do that, they got kicked out. And then Susan moved right back into it and has stayed there ever since. So my suspicion is that, yeah, she thought maybe she's going to cover up the trail by getting other people to rent it out. But then she figured out that's not a good tactic either, because then they can let authorities come search, and I don't want authorities here. So I just have to guard that house.
What is your personal opinion on what happened to the earring?
I really do think it was just misplaced.
You think it's just honestly like an honest mistake?
At this point, I do. I think that a lot of the things that happened early on were just plain just incompetence. Mm-hmm. For instance, like the big one, I think, was the first sheriff saying in a newspaper, if Paul won't talk to us, we can't close this case. We need Paul to tell us what happened. And so it's like, that's a huge, like, you just showed your poker hand. Now Paul knows he doesn't have to talk, and that's crazy. Mm-hmm. You should have been playing it like close to the vest and saying, we've got like a case that we're building, and we don't, whether he talks or not, we're going to get him. And instead he just kind of blew it. And I think the earring was probably falling into the same category. I think that somebody put it in a bag, they didn't think it was important, and the bag either got thrown out or lost in a drawer somewhere. Or maybe at this point, maybe they found it and they just won't say that they found it because they don't think it's important or it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of whatever's going on behind the scenes, we don't know about it. They're working on it secretly. But at this point, I don't think it was like a big conspiracy, and I don't think it was intentionally misplaced, although it could have been. Mm-hmm. I don't know. But I've started to lean towards just old-fashioned incompetence.
Well, I don't think people really know this. What is your whole, because I know you've met with the sheriffs, right? You met with Ian Parkinson.
Briefly with Parkinson, but mainly with the lead detective on her case.
Oh, okay. So what are the vibes you get from that? Just straight up, like, how does it feel when you go and talk to them? Are they accepting of what you've done? Are they like, how does that go down when you walk into the sheriff's office?
Yeah, my initial meeting with them was like thanks for doing the podcast, and that's what Parkinson said directly to me, like, thank you for doing this. They said the public's like interest in this case is very helpful. Like, reigniting the public interest has been helpful for them, but it's also kind of slowed down their investigation because there's stuff they were trying to do in secret that now all of a sudden is blown up again, where people are paying attention, and now people are angry at them too on top of it. Like, now people are upset because they just saw for the first time chronologically how much the Smart family has gone through over 23 years. And the Smart family's early on, they told me, we support the current administration. Like, we really do believe this current sheriff's administration is doing all that they can do. And we're still frustrated with how long it's taking, but don't blame them. We don't want people sending them letters or like harassing them in any way. But once I sat down with them, I really did get the impression it's like, okay, these guys are committed to this. These are people who want to solve this. They're not just like, twiddling their thumbs and hoping that it will go away. I do think that they want to get this done. And they were receptive about the podcast. There were nitpicky things, like they specifically didn't like that I included some of David Smallwood's stuff in the last episode because they're like, that guy's been thoroughly debunked. And it's like, well, he's still a major part of this story chronologically. This is the most recent big part of this. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't not going to talk about it, but...
David Smallwood's the one who brought that weird, not DNA machine, right? Where they would do 360s and it would pinpoint certain locations.
Yeah, David Smallwood is the one that brought that scientist in
the
to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Which the sheriff's department doesn't take seriously. Like, they don't think that machine is serious. And then the cadaver dog that alerted, it's like, okay, a cadaver dog did alert, but there's a lot of factors that go into that. For instance, the cadaver dog alerted from the neighbor's house. So, like, how are we supposed to get a warrant for the house next door because the cadaver dog alerts from the neighbor's house? And also with the machine, they're like, it's supposed to pick up certain DNA profiles and stuff. And they're like, but I think on the website for the machine or something, it says the DNA could have come from anywhere within a mile of that area. So they're like, we have to get really, really specific about where we serve a search warrant, and we can't do it based on a dog alerting next door. It's like, it would be great if we could, but they just really didn't take a lot of David Smallwood's work seriously, and part of that might have been because he was so antagonistic towards them. He was not chill.
Yeah. Well, not only that, like, when it comes down to, I don't know, is David the one who would march out in front of like the Michael Jackson trial, or was that Dennis? That was Dennis. Mm-hmm. Okay, I get those two mixed up often, so I might ask you that another time, just because of so many names involved. But so that's good at least. When you were talking to them, to the sheriffs, going back to kind of what we were talking about before, when you were asking them questions, did you ever get like really frustrated when you could tell that they had information on a question that you asked, but they can't say anything because it's part of the investigation?
Yes, incredibly frustrated. And I was very upfront about that. And the cool thing was the detective gets it. Like, he was like, I know how frustrating this must be because you've spent so much time on this. And he was like, honestly, I want to tell you some of this stuff, but I absolutely can't. I just can't do it. And so... yeah, he knew that I was frustrated, and I told him up front, there's questions I'm going to ask that I know you're going to have to give me a non-answer. I know you're going to have to say, I can't comment on that, but I'm going to ask him anyway. And he said, go ahead. So I have a whole tape of me sitting down with him just going through, what happened to the earring? And he's like, I can't really comment on that. Who lost the earring? Like, little things like that. Why wasn't the cadaver dog alert enough for you to get in the backyard? And why haven't you gone back to Ruben's house to search? And he's like, there's a lot that they just can't comment on. And he's like, and I know how frustrating that must be. So it's at this point, it's just a kind of a matter of, do you trust that they're doing their job? And if you do, you got to be patient. And if you don't, what are you going to do about it? Like, there's really no other option. They're the authority in this case. Yeah,
honestly, like I was listening to you talk about how that they that you were trying to get information from them from the podcast that I was listening to, and I was thinking about, do you think that there's ever a situation where an interviewer like yourself, or journalist, I should say, because that's really what it is. It's straight up journalism, journalism and investigative reporting. But like, is there ever a way that a law enforcement agency could give someone all that information, could like to someone like yourself, where like they could take it on as the detective, but like not actually be the detective?
I think so, but I think it's probably pretty uncommon. And I don't know what it would take to get into that sort of situation. I just read about, I don't listen to a lot of true crime. Like, honestly, I'm not a fan of most true crime podcasts. It's just not my genre. It's not what I prefer to listen to in my downtime. But I've been reading about other big true crime podcasts, and there was a big one that came out a few months ago called Red Ball.
Oh yeah,
and it's
I like
by
that.
the makers of Crime Junkie. I didn't listen to it, but I read this article about it that was saying that the officer involved in that got in a lot of trouble because he gave those podcasters like a lot of stuff that people had been requesting through Freedom of Information Acts for years that they'd been denied, and then he just like handed it to these podcasters. So they were saying now a bunch of people want that same info and they're being denied again, and they're like, but you already gave it to somebody else. So like there's a precedent now where you gave it to people but you're denying it to other people, and you can't do that. And so I don't know. I think it gets them in trouble more often than not. And I think they're sensitive about leaks. You know, there's certain information they don't want getting out there, and they don't know who I am. I hope that I've established a rapport with them now, that they know they can trust me, and that if they did need to tell me something, that I could just kind of sit on it, you know, because I am trying to do what's best for the family. And my main goal, and I've said this all along, I really don't care about the prosecution side of things. I don't care about the legal side of things. I want them to recover Kristin Smart's body. Wherever Kristin Smart's body is, I want them to recover it, and I want her to be returned to her parents. And then past that point, I don't really care. Like, I'd be interested in covering it. Like, if they want me to like sit in court cases when things really get moving and they want me to cover that, I'd be happy to do it. But my number one concern is, can we find Kristin Smart?
Yeah. Is it safe to say you put hundreds of hours into this?
I think probably, yeah.
Just because, like no disrespect to anybody at the sheriff's office, but I don't think there's anybody there that has the time nor the sanity to be able to do something like what you have. Like it's seriously a gift to be able to be so passionate and just focused on something, like to the point where you can put hundreds of hours into it. Like, you know, like at a certain point, like everybody's human. Like it's almost like if I was in the position as Ian Parkinson, I would almost want to bring you in, even though it's like kind of risky, just because of the knowledge that you've gained, just because you're solely focused on just that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and they did push a few years ago to hire specifically a cold case and unsolved case detective, who that would be his only job, and they got one. But the problem is, I think he's got like 40 unsolved San Luis Obispo cases. So Kristin's is just one of those. And even though I think hers is very high priority, I think because it's gone on so long and it's so high profile, I really do think it's a priority for them. But still, his attention has to be, it just logically has to be spread amongst all these other cases, and mine is solely Kristin Smart's case. And there's a lot of other Kristin Smart supporters that I've been meeting with over the last year or so, and we'll just sit down and have coffee and just toss around ideas like, do you think it's possible this person was involved, or maybe this person knows what happened? And it's at this point I have like an encyclopedic knowledge of names, locations, even like addresses. Like I know people's addresses by heart now, phone numbers and stuff. Anybody involved with this, and I'm pretty good with dates, and I've got a timeline that I've kept that's now like 20 pages long. It's just every date that anything significant happened to anybody involved. So even down to minute details, like when the Flores family had a garage sale, you know, like I have those all in this timeline, and I know them pretty well. Like I know off the top of my head when search warrants were executed and stuff. So yeah, I'm happy to help the sheriff's department in any way that is beneficial to them, and hopefully they will find a way to utilize that.
Yeah. Do you ever find anything that like slows down your own investigation, like misleading tips? I know we kind of talked about you don't get too many of those, but like, is there anything that really like kind of stands in your way?
It probably just that I'm the only one doing all of it, like any of it. Like for one, the emails that I get, it's just my email inbox. And so people will email me and say like, thank you so much for doing this podcast. I went to school with Kristin, and like, I didn't get to know her, but I really appreciate you doing this. And I really want to reply to every single one of those people because it means a lot that they reached out. But I get so many of those a day that I just can't, I start reading them and it's like, I just cannot possibly respond to all of these. And I keep telling myself, I'm just going to set aside a day where that's all I do is reply to these. And it's yet to come. It's like the ones I've been replying to are the ones where they're like, I have like important info and I know like an exact person, place, or something, and I'll try to reach out to those people immediately and say, can I meet with you? Can I talk to you? But anything beyond that, it's like I wish I had more time to do everything. But I really spread myself thin because I'm just doing all this stuff myself.
I'm honestly really glad to hear that you don't get a lot of misleading tips, because to be honest, when I first was hearing about how you get hundreds of tips a day, I thought your inbox was filled with internet trolls, just because I know how toxic the internet can be with certain situations, regardless of what it is. Like, there's literally no boundaries when it comes to stuff like that. And just with the open eyes and how much success the podcast has had, I was just wondering what kind of things were being actually said to you.
I have gotten a few that feel like they're coming from people who are maybe not the most reliable, but not by not intentionally. I think they do want to help, but I'll get an email from like an 80-year-old woman who's like, I saw a vision of Kristin in this field. And it's like, I don't really know what to do with that. And like, honestly, even those, I'll usually drive by the field, or like, I'll look it up on Google Earth and go, is there any connection that this location has to anything? Is that even worth looking into? But yeah, when I get a number of those a day, it's like, okay, some of these I just don't really have time to look into, or I think they've already been thoroughly debunked. I've had a lot of people email me and say, I just know she's under the Performing Arts Center at Cal Poly, and it's like, I just have looked so far into that, and like the timeline of when the foundation was laid and when the first show took place there and stuff. It's like, it just seems so much more unlikely than so many of the other locations. But a lot of the people who went to Cal Poly at the time, that was the big rumor at school, is like the concrete foundation was still wet at the time. He would have been able to like store her body there. And it's like, yeah, but then somebody would have come across her, or, it was just, it seems unlikely to me. But then people, when they email me, they're so adamant that they know that that's where she is, that it's like, I maybe she is, maybe, I guess, but I think that's pretty far down on my list of possibilities.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, do you, not without speculating, out of respect for Kristin, like without being like too out there, is there any other possible way it's not Paul? Like, is there any evidence that supports that it could be completely not connected? Because I know that everything is so focused and that there is a lot of damning evidence toward him. So I'm not discrediting any of that in any way. But, like, is there anything else with any other suspects? Or
there really isn't. And that's people will point to Scott Peterson a lot because he went to Cal Poly at the same time that Kristin did. And they're like, he murdered his wife. And so maybe he was. And it's like, for one, they looked into Scott Peterson. Like, once they found out he murdered his wife, they're like, could he have killed this girl? And they didn't find anything that pointed to him. But part of the reason for that is there is an overwhelming circumstantial evidence that keeps pointing back to this guy. And so even when there is, like, the Rex Krebs murders you mentioned happened in 1998 and 1999, and it fit the profile, like the college student walking home drunk, doesn't make it home, and they dug up their bodies up at his cabin or whatever he was living in Davis Canyon, I think. And Kristin's body wasn't one of them. And he confessed to the girls that he did kill, but he was like, I don't know anything about Kristin Smart. People still will say Rex Krebs is a possibility. So I looked into it, and he was in prison at the time that Kristin disappeared. So it's like, it's not just that there's not evidence pointing to other people. It's that there's so much evidence that points to this guy that it's like, this is the unluckiest guy in the world if somebody else killed her, because there's so much that kept pointing back to him. For instance, like the cadaver dogs alerting to his mattress. How did somebody die in his dorm room at the same time that somebody killed the girl that he walked home but had nothing to do with her murder? Like, it's just a weird coincidence, but then there's so many of those weird coincidences. Like I mentioned, the trucks disappearing. Like, what are the chances that those trucks would have gone missing within a year of this and the police never got to search them or whatever? It's just so many things happened that pointed towards this guy over and over again.
And not to mention, as the case started building, the depositions got really shoddy too. Like, as far as like when Ruben was talking about like bed liners, but like going back and forth about if there was one or if he changed it, if he didn't, if the truck was impounded, like all these different things that weren't lining up in
and see those things, like those depositions, are things that were not made public before the podcast. So people for years that were pointing to Paul Flores, and it's like, once I got access to those things that were private up until that point, it's like there's even more evidence that makes it look like this family is responsible. And that's another reason why when people have suggested alternate theories, I take all of them very seriously because I don't want to have tunnel vision. But when they say, you know, Paul just like disposed of her body under the Performing Arts Center, or he like a couple people thought maybe he brought her to like the they had like an animal sciences building or something, and they're like, maybe he like, I don't know. I don't want to go into detail about what he could have done to get rid of her body and all that, but it's like what's missing from all those theories is that I really do think his dad is hiding something, and his dad wouldn't need to hide something if he just disposed of her body at the school without his dad's help.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that his dad is so deceptive and refuses to answer so many questions, it's like, why would you ever be that way if you had nothing to do with this girl's disappearance and helping your son cover it up?
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, everything that is just revolving around Ruben, and like some of the weird things point to his house, and it just makes me have a very bad feel about the whole situation. Like, it just gives me a super bad vibe.
Yeah,
definitely. He just is very skeptic and takes a second to think about his answers, and then I don't know. And then he's talking about his route. You might have to go subpoena that. And I don't know, though.
And he makes people get the information out of him. Like, he doesn't give it up easy ever,
right.
Which is very annoying and very frustrating when you're listening to a deposition that was like in early 2000 or something like that.
No, the deposition tape is from 97.
Oh,
so it's just a year after she disappeared, and already he's very deceptive.
Is that deposition because of the lawsuit from the Floreses to the Smarts?
No, it's the Smarts against the Floreses.
Oh, okay.
Against Paul Flores.
So that's when they were trying to sue him for the death of the disappearance,
for wrongful
right?
death, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so they deposed both of his parents. They deposed Paul, but he just took the fifth, which is his legal right. But the parents they don't have that right. So their depositions were very long, and there's full transcripts of all that. And then they deposed a bunch of people he worked with. They deposed the people that walked Kristin home that night with Paul. And I read through every single one of those. I read over and over again, writing down names that each of them mentioned, and then looking into those people to see if I could interview them. But one big tell for me about the parents, about Paul's parents and their role in this, is I thought, okay, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe their son is completely innocent. What would they do if their son had killed her? Like, if he's innocent, what would they have done if he had killed her? Would they be forthcoming, and would they come forward and say, here's what happened, and we're going to take full responsibility, and our son did the wrong thing, like I think all of our parents would do, like most regular parents would do? And the big tell in that for me was the incident in junior high where Paul almost killed one of his classmates. And so that's in one of my episodes where he like stomped on this guy's head, put him in the hospital for like a week, and like did all kinds of damage to this guy's brain, and like broke both of his eardrums, and like dislocated his jaw, and just really, really over the top. And then when they're asked about that in their depositions, both of them severely downplay that, and they're like, I don't know the kid's name, I don't really know what happened, I have no idea how much we were sued for. They're just like, I don't even, and then the way they tell the story is, well, our kid got jumped and he was just defending himself. So it's like, so that to me is the big tell, is so that's proof that when your kid does something wrong, you guys lie and cover it up. You refuse to accept responsibility. So that to me is directly applicable to what happened with Kristin. If Paul did do it, that's how they would tell the story, is, well, he had no choice, or she deserved it, which there's rumors that they've said that to people privately, that they've told people like, yeah, our son killed her, but she deserved it. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, that's horrible. That's absolutely disgusting. How do you think someone like Paul, with a before and an after history of just being a absolutely dirtbag human being, like how does all of that evidence going against his character just still, like, I don't know, like, it's obviously not evidence in the case, but it just his whole character is just absolutely negative at this point. Like, I don't think there's up until the time, like, even when he was in his late 20s, he was doing stuff at like his coworkers at restaurants and stuff were saying that he was doing stuff to them, right? Like, like what? It just is insane to me. Thank God he hasn't killed anybody else, by the way, because a lot of people are or hasn't made people allegedly killed anybody else. Because to be honest, like I've noticed, not just me personally, but I've looked up statistics and everything. A lot of like people who do horrible things like this, if it's not just like an accident in the moment, they are repeat people. So like it just, thank God he hasn't done that again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's why I tend to lean towards that he did not intentionally set out to kill her that night. I don't think he's like a serial killer who like picks a woman and then murders her. I think he was trying to have sex with her that night, and I think he saw her, either whether she got drunk on her own or whether he drugged her drink, or maybe somebody else even drugged her drink. I think once he saw the state that she was in, he was like, here we go. Like, I can finally get laid. I think he might have even been a virgin up till that point. He never had a girlfriend. Like, all through high school, both of his parents said in their depositions, never dated a girl. And then you find out why that is, because all these people I interviewed are like, yeah, he scared us. Like, he creeped us all out, and he didn't communicate with us like a normal person. He wasn't social. He was awkward and intrusive and just kind of lingering, creepy, and I don't know where I was going with that. But so I think his goal was to lose his virginity that night. I think his goal was to try to find a woman. He tried to kiss several girls that were at the party who I talked to, who were like, yeah, he tried to make out with me that night. So Kristin was just the unlucky one.
Yeah.
How she died, I have no idea, but I don't think he intended that. I think whether it was maybe an accident in the process of trying to rape her, or whether she woke up and started screaming and he was trying to keep her quiet, or he got really angry with her, or she tried to fight back and he flew into a rage the way that he did in middle school and killed her accidentally. Like, there's so many possibilities, but I don't think he intentionally set out to kill her. And once he did, I think he probably felt awful. I think he freaked out and tried to get rid of her, and then I don't think it's the kind of thing he would want to repeat. I don't think he would want to kill another girl. But there is speculation. I mentioned in one of the episodes that somebody who worked at the same company he did down south, who worked the exact same shift and position that he did, had been murdered a few years before he started working there. So it's like, is it possible that he was involved in that? Well, they never solved it, and they don't know who did it, so it's possible.
Yeah.
But I lean towards that he's not a repeat offender, in the same way that I do with Scott Peterson. Because when people said, well, he killed his wife, how do you know he didn't kill Kristin? Well, for one, the type of person like who murders their pregnant wife right before she's about to get, like I think she was 8 months pregnant or something. That's the type of person who's trying to get out of a commitment. He's like, he doesn't like the way his life is going. He's cheating on her. He wants a way out, and that's the only way he sees. I think they call that family annihilation killing, where the Chris Watts murder that happened a couple years ago. There's a lot of murders like that fall into that category, where this is not somebody who normally goes around killing people. He just freaked out and didn't see any other way out. And I think that's what Scott Peterson falls into. I don't think Paul's one of those.
Yeah, that's absolutely insane, because he had a girlfriend for like a year or so, right? That he was abusive to, or is that alleged, or like what was?
Who is it, Paul or Scott?
Paul.
Yeah, so the ex girlfriend that I interviewed, he was with for a couple years, and I don't know that he was physically abusive with her up until the very end, which I think is when she finally got out, when he like put his hands on her. But he was very he was a severe alcoholic. The way that she explained it is like she would come home from work or something, and he'd be like rolling around on the floor drunk and crying and saying, I want to tell you something, but I can't tell you, like, have this secret. And so I don't know that he was explicitly abusive to her, but there was something off about him the whole time she was with him.
Yeah, that's absolutely insane. And he was manipulative too, right? Like, he just had tried to take over control of the whole situation, correct? Like, is that how it went? I'm kind of bad with some of the small details from the podcast.
Yeah, and I think she strongly suspects that he was cheating on her the whole time they were together and stuff. And he just, to me, like, his personality seems in line with just like sexual deviancy. It seems like he just has these weird, whether it's from some kind of childhood trauma, in the same way that maybe his stutter is. Like, a lot of stuttering can happen from childhood trauma with an abusive parent. I do think his dad was probably abusive when he was a kid. I know for a fact his dad was abusive towards Susan, put her in the hospital at least once that I know of. So I think it's pretty likely that he was probably abusive to his kids too. And maybe Paul developed some sexual deviancy from that, but he just doesn't seem to react like a normal person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely insane. So, where do you see this case going in the future? Like, do you see a resolve? Do you see us finding Kristin? I know that's ultimately the goal, but do you see that's in the very future, or like?
For me, it feels very attainable. Like, for me, it feels like there's a strong possibility that we'll know where Kristin is this year or the next, like soon. I really do think that with the amount of research that I put in, I started to narrow it down to the point that when people would suggest, well, maybe she's here, maybe she's there, it's like, there's just so many signs pointing to this other location, And so I feel pretty good about where she could be, but I don't know what the sheriff needs in order to do something about that, or if the sheriff feels the same way I do, because they've got, I've got a couple puzzle pieces. They've got the entire rest of the puzzle that they've been putting together for years but can't share. Who knows what they know, that like they might know exactly where she is and they're just waiting for the right moment, or maybe they have no idea and some of what I know might help them. I think recovering Kristin's body, priority number one, is pretty possible. But then as far as proving that Paul was responsible and convicting him, I have no idea what they've got. I have no idea what goes into that. I don't know a lot about the legal side of things. But I do think that we could find Kristin. Yeah.
That's super cool. Is it speculated that she could be buried at Ruben's house in Avocado Grove, because he does have that part of the property to the side of his yard, correct?
Yeah, so that comes up in one of my episodes that a coworker of Susan's at the time said that Susan had told her, like, the sheriffs are so stupid they've never even looked in our Avocado Grove. And then that reminded me, because I had interviewed Paul's ex-girlfriend months before I talked to that lady, that when we had talked, she had said a similar thing. Like, I was trying to go out to their Avocado Grove and they were like, no, don't go over there, come in the house. And so there was already something fishy about that area, so that's a strong possibility. But I don't know whether they've already looked there or not. It's like, I don't know that they have, but I also don't know what they have and haven't done. I hope they've already looked there. I hope,
Yeah, so they've kept a lot of underneath lock and key to you then, so you don't really know anything else other than what's in the podcast for the most part.
Yeah, at this point, like there were questions that I was able to ask the sheriff's department that they could confirm for me, and things that they were able to explain. Like, you had said this in one episode, well, let me explain why we did that way, or let me explain why that's not quite accurate. So they were pretty forthcoming about certain things, but there's a lot that it's like, look, as far as like jeopardizing our ability to convict this guy, there's not too much we can say publicly. And so, but that signals to me that it's like the goal is to get Kristin and convict her killer. Like, they're still trying to do that actively, or else they just wouldn't care. Like, it wouldn't bother them to just come out and say what they know.
I've heard you talk about so when a case goes cold because they release all the information, do you think that would be more beneficial or less beneficial in trying to find Kristin's body?
I thought about that a lot early on, because I got frustrated that so much of their evidence is behind lock and key. And I talk about in the first episode that I got this list of contents of the evidence boxes, and it's like, underwear. It's like, what underwear? And are those important? Like, memo about pizza cart. It's like, what is that about? And there's just different things that were super intriguing. It's like email with Australian student. Like, is that important, or is that something like not at all important? Like letters that were sent to her, like all these things that they've kept in evidence boxes that they will not disclose. That was really frustrating for me. But at the same time, if they were to close this case, call it cold, and let us see all that evidence, that would mean they were no longer looking into it. It would mean that they had given up and they believed that there were no more strong leads, and that would be pretty daunting. And I think that the Smart family they would much prefer that it was kept active and that we didn't know what was going on than for them to make it cold.
Right.
Because the moment they make it cold, their hope is sort of out the window. And then you just have people like me who it's like, in my spare time, I'll do the best I can to look into this, but I don't have the resources that a sheriff's department does. Yeah. So I hope they don't make it cold, because I do think they're on to something. I think they've probably got something cooking, or something that they're a goal that they're moving towards, and I don't think they're close to closing it.
Do you think the Flores family is closely watching everything that happens?
Yeah, I do. I think that's pretty much their life. Like, I think that's how they live their lives now. Like I said, when we set up the candlelight vigil, they knew when it was happening.
Did they say anything? Like, did they come outside? Did they open a window?
No, they stayed indoors that whole time. I don't know if you follow the Facebook group though, but a couple weeks ago when they put up the new billboard and we were standing in the yard of the lawyer's building, which is just like a block up from Susan's house, she came then and took a bunch of pictures of us, and then she waved at us and said, "Hi guys, how you doing?" Just like taunting us.
Really?
And which is really, it's very telling about her attitude towards this case.
Yeah.
It's like, we're putting up a new billboard because somebody's daughter is still missing, and yeah, your son is the suspect, but it doesn't say that on the billboard. This is just, her picture and a reward amount and stuff. Why would you come out and harass us? Like, why would you
take pictures?
Yeah, and so that's their main tactic now. Ruben, Mike McConville, and Susan all have a camera, and when they see people coming, they grab their camera and they take lots of pictures of you. I don't know what they do with those, if they just collect them, or if it's just the threat, or if every time they take pictures, they go directly to the police department and say, "This person trespassed today." I have no idea why they do that, but it feels like a power move to me. It's like they're trying to scare people off, and that's the way they've figured out how to do it.
Yeah,
but it's very telling about who these people are. It's like, this is how you decided to live your life. Like, this is your priority.
Yeah, that's absolutely insane. I wonder if they how much they study the podcast. It's got to be some type of at this point, like the way a serial killer almost wants to be wrote about. I feel like it's almost getting to that point. You know what I mean? Like, It's like, not that they're proud of it, but like they kind of bask in it a little bit.
I think they think it's funny.
Yeah.
I think they and I think Kristin's dad said that in one of the episodes. Like, I think they've laughed about this before, and I totally agree. I think they get off on it, and I think they think it's funny, especially when when people are spinning their wheels and getting really, really angry at like the sheriff's department or Cal Poly. It's like, they love this. Like, the Flores family must love that people are sort of divided on this and not working together to get one goal done. Mm-hmm. When I started the podcast, before I put out the first episode, I think the Facebook group had like 9,000 members, and it's up to like 13 or 14,000 now.
Oh,
so there's
cool.
Tons of people on that group, and the Flores family are definitely one of them. Like, the Flores family is keeping an eye on that group.
Do they have like burner accounts, or are they just blatantly in there?
Yeah, I think they call them, it's like a sock puppet account that you can start where it's just, you don't put a picture or anything.
Like, have you seen Don't Fuck With Cats?
Yes, exactly like that.
Okay.
So yeah, they're just starting profiles under fake names, and they keep an eye on everything we're doing. They might even be trolling us on there. Like, they might be some of the people who are very active commenting on stuff. We don't know, but we do know that they know what we're doing whenever we discuss it on the group. So it's gotten to the point where it's like, if it's really, really important, don't say it on the group, because we don't want them to know what we're doing. We don't want them to know what's going on. And I really do think they devote a lot of their time to just watching that group. I think they watch Dennis Mann's website. I think they've probably listened to the whole podcast and they've talked about it. I think you're right. I think they do enjoy to a certain extent, and I do think they think it's funny.
That's got to be really frustrating to not even have like a safe place to go discuss things now, just because of how infiltrated they're trying to become, trying to be in every single aspect of it and be in everybody's back pockets.
Yeah. And so for that reason, I've been very private about a lot of what I've been doing since the podcast has ended. It's like, I'm working on a lot of stuff that I'm not going to talk about until the next episode comes out. It's like, you'll find out when the episode drops, and also it will be better produced that way. There will be music behind it. It'll be a full presentation. But for me to just leak each new piece, it's like to tell somebody I'm working on something. The next thing I know, somebody else is texting me saying, "Hey, I heard you're doing this." And it's like, all right, well, that's not good that the word is spreading so quickly. I'm trying to do stuff, not necessarily secretly, but at least covertly for a little while, just to make sure I don't spoil anything, which I think is a big part of the sheriff's concern. It's like, the more that we share, the more it will get out there, and it will get to the wrong people. And there's certain people we don't want to know this.
Totally. Yeah. Honestly, I don't even think they want Paul to know anything that's even going on. Just him, period. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and obviously if you tell the people, it's going to get back to him somehow. So it's like, Just one of those things. You just don't want him to plan for anything or to be able to put a defense against whatever's happening.
And I had mentioned in the last episode, so when I parked at Paul's house, I got there at like 6:30 in the morning, and it was still dark out and everything. And when I got there, his truck was parked horizontally, like blocking the access to his front door, and it felt very intentional.
Like in the grass? Or like,
yeah, so like he's got a lawn and then a driveway next to it, but in order to get to the lawn, you have to go through a little gate in his fence. Like a little door that opens, and his truck was blocking that, so I had to like squeeze past it to get to his door. And when I first saw that, I thought, I've never seen somebody park their car like that in their own driveway. And I've seen his house many times on Google Maps. It's always been parked normally, and I thought he knew I was coming, or he knew that somebody was coming soon. Like, he must be paying attention, or he knows that the podcast is picking up steam. He knows a lot of people are talking about him, and he knows that someone's going to come. It just felt like, oh, he's aware that his time is coming.
That's very eerie.
Yeah.
That's very,
and
very
so
eerie.
I was just there to, I mean, all I was going to do was ask him questions, which I'm 100% positive he would have refused to answer, but at least to see him face to face was something I wanted to do and didn't get to. I don't even think he was home. I don't think he was even hiding out. I think he had left, but it felt like he knew someone was on their way. And that's probably not what the sheriffs want. It's like, we don't want him knowing that we're on our way. We want to, I don't know. Even when I speculate like that, I think maybe they know something I don't, and they've got other tactics now, or they maybe even have other suspects now, is always a possibility. But that's where my mind goes, is I hope they're going after Paul.
Yeah, totally. I kind of wanted to ask you, why it's still on the top of my brain, what is the future for the podcast? Like, I know you just announced episode 7, which is absolutely insane, because I'm really excited to listen to that.
Definitely.
But what's kind of your steps here? Are you just going to drop things as you get new information? Because I know you kind of said that before, but what's the plan?
Yeah, so since the podcast ended, I've done maybe 20 new interviews with people. I've driven to new locations. I've looked into other theories. But this next episode that's coming out is going to be specifically about me sitting down with the sheriff's department and going through the case and the podcast and the future of the case and all those sorts of things. Me just sort of asking them, what have you guys been doing? Because the public thinks you guys are doing nothing. They think you're sitting on your hands, and it doesn't seem like that's the case. So what is really going on here? What can you share? And that's what episode 7 is going to be mostly about. After that, I didn't have plans to release more after 6. I thought I would just take a break and be done with it. And it turns out there was no break at all. Like, it just immediately went into the next phase. And so I think episode 7 will be coming out pretty soon here. I don't have a release date yet. And that's part of the trouble with having the number of listeners that I have now and the number of people that are following. When I make a new post, my phone just it looks like fireworks going off. It's like so many people are on it, and all these people want to know when is it coming out? And I don't have the answer yet. Like, I have no idea. I just wanted you to know I'm working on it. Like, it will happen, and it's coming soon. I'm just not quite sure when, and as soon as I do, I will announce that. But after episode 7, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I do have a lot more material, but I want to make sure that each episode has its own thread. I want to make sure that each episode continues to have a theme of some kind. So I don't just want to scatter a bunch of random miscellaneous interviews into one episode for the sake of putting out a new episode. I really don't like the true crime podcasts that do that I have listened to. They put out bonus episode after bonus episode, and you can tell really they only had this much material, and they just put a bunch of ads so they could make more money. And that was one of my goals from the start, is no advertising, I don't want to do anything like that, because it will compromise my ability to tell this story seriously.
Which is very honorable, by the way. You put in a ton of time for little to nothing. I know people support you through GoFundMe and different avenues like that, but it's super cool that you would just drop everything and do this for somebody completely random. So super honorable of you to do that. Yeah, man. I mean, episode 7, I'm really looking forward to. Who's the detective on the case? Can I ask that?
Yeah, so I, at this point, I've been in contact with Commander Nathan Paul. He was the lead investigator from, I think, 2013 to 2017. And at this point, kind of like how I talked about, I've just sort of developed an encyclopedic knowledge of all the dates and times and names and everything in this case. He's that guy at the sheriff's department. So now they've got the guy who is in charge of cold cases and unsolved. He's the one who's in charge now, but Nathan Paul is still the guy who's if they need to know anything about the Kristin case, they come to me. And
Cool.
so he was the one I sat down with and did like a long form interview. And so he will be the person that is featured a lot in episode 7.
Cool. That's super cool. And did you when you sat down with Ian Parkinson, did you record any of that?
No, I just had a cordial like meet and greet, like, hello, thank you for doing the podcast. It's nice to meet you. The end.
He's a busy guy, isn't he?
He is, and he's sort of, I think he has so many other things that he does. He's the sheriff/coroner. And so he's like, anytime there's like an accident or something, like he has to be on the scene of all these things. And also he's like the face. He's like a political figure. And so he has to do a lot of things that are not just solely detective work and investigation. So he's got a team of people who are doing each different thing.
He's the coroner too?
Yeah.
Had no idea. That's got to be a gnarly job load. The head sheriff and the coroner is probably, I feel like you got to split those up. You know what I mean? That's probably driving him insane. So shout out to Ian for doing all that, because I could not imagine having to do all the political stuff and then having to be at every single accident too in SLO County for the most part. Like, is it damn near every single accident?
Honestly, I have no idea. I don't know if he kind of stays at the home base and is there for when bodies arrive or whatever. I don't know how that works. I just know that his title is officially sheriff coroner.
That's crazy. That's super crazy. Honestly, bro, I think that's as much as I got. Like, super cool to talk to you. Like, thank you so much for driving up here.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the insight and the little tips. It's cool. It's crazy to see this binder. I saw it on the Mustang
right.
Daily, and it doesn't do it justice when you see it in person.
Yeah. And
it's a lot of time.
It's a lot of stuff. It is.
That's absolutely insane. Well, thank you so much for watching. This has been Nate Sunday Sesh. Where can they find you at?
Yourownbackyardpodcast.com is probably the best place. You can find my Spotify and iTunes and everything from there.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, this has been Nate Sunday Sesh. I'm your boy Nate.
It's your boy Deej.
And we're out.